Hi, everyone. Welcome to our second webinar in the series about the U.S. healthcare system. My name is Dan Treiman, and I'm the CEO at NEIBC, or New England Israel Business Council. We are a not-for-profit organization that its mission is to facilitate and strengthen the business relationship between Israel and Massachusetts. I also would like to thank Sagit Sadeatia that partnered with me in putting together this series. Just a reminder, this is the second webinar in the series, and the third one is going to take place on Tuesday, June 6th at 10 a.m., and the guest speaker will be David Baron. As I mentioned, we are recording those webinars, and this particular one will be available on YouTube in a week or so, and I'll send you a link. As far as Q&A, if you have any questions, please use the chat button on the application, and Sagit will manage the Q&A process at the end of the presentation. And with that, I would like to introduce our guest speaker. He'll talk about U.S. regulatory affairs, best practices. He is Tzvi Ladin. He's the co-founder and principal at Boston MedTech Advisors. Tzvi has over 35 years of experience in the medical industry, government, and academia, focusing on developing and managing clinical regulatory affairs and reimbursement initiatives. At BMTA, they are focusing on establishing regulatory strategies for therapeutic and diagnostic technologies, including submission of regulatory applications, including 510K, PMAS for products in all classes, and drug device combination products, and representing companies in negotiation with FDA and other regulatory agencies. Tzvi also taught mechanical engineering and biomedical engineering at MIT and Boston University, and served as a scientific advisor to the FDA. He earned his PhD in medical engineering from MIT and Harvard Medical School Division of Health, Science, and Technology. And with that, I would like to invite Tzvi to the podium. Tzvi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen here. Thank you, Dan, for your kind introduction, and welcome everybody. What we are going to cover over the next hour or so would be some general principles and general aspects of FDA regulation of medical devices. And I would like to share some of my experience and also focus on some of the emerging aspects of regulation of digital health. Boston MedTech Advisors was founded in 2004 and has assisted over the past 19 years, going on 20, over 350 medical device companies. The geographic distribution is roughly 50% US companies, about 25 to 30% Israeli companies, and the rest are from all over the world. The question that is most typically asked is, how can we succeed introducing new medical devices or a new medical technology to the US healthcare market? And answering that question really requires focusing on the classic questions of who is the target population for the device, when is it going to be used? Where is it going to be used? What are the essentials of the technology and the medical device? And why is it important, or is it going to be important to use the device? And in thinking about the path to success, I often think about three gates that need to be successfully traversed, penetrated, entered. The first one, and that's clearly a requirement, and that is an absolute must, is to successfully negotiate the regulatory aspects of the new medical device or medical technology. And that has to do with dealing with FDA and all of the nuances of getting a new product on or through the regulatory agency. The second one needs to address the question of who is going to pay for that and how much. And just as a representation of the largest provider in the US, that's the Center of Medicare and Medicaid Services. That represents the second gate. The third gate is probably the most challenging one, and that is how to transform the clinical practice such that the use of the new medical technology and medical device is going to be routine for that particular intended target population, and that deals with the adoption of the new technologies such that it becomes standard care or standard practice. So, what is necessary, what is sufficient, and to what extent both are necessary for a successful launch and a successful adoption of a new medical technology. What is represented in this slide are the key stakeholders in the adoption of any medical technology. First and foremost, the regulatory aspect dealing with FDA. The second is reimbursement dealing with the payers. Both of them represent the necessary and the sufficient. And then the equally important aspects of the patients for whom that technology is intended, the market that needs to see the scaling up of the technology and its provision, and and finally, not necessarily in the order of importance, the providers who actually need to use the technology and successfully incorporate it into their practice. And so what we are going to first address is some general principles of device classification and regulatory challenges. And since I do not have any idea of what is the background of the people on the call, I'm going to provide some very general notions of what it means what does the regulation of medical devices look like, and what are some general principles that need to be addressed in negotiating a successful clearance or approval of the medical device. Then I'm going to share with you a case study which I think is unique and important, mostly because it represents what I would call best practices versus other practices, and what could be the ramifications of that. And then we'll move on to the new, recent challenges and emerging issues that are related to digital health. What is unique about that aspect of medical devices and medical technology, how it is regulated by FDA, and then we'll end with an example of a new product, which was a prescription digital treatment, and what it looked like and what challenges it had to overcome. So starting with the basics, as we are dealing with the regulatory agency, namely the Food and Drug Administration, um, there is an actual definition of what a medical device is. And I'm not going to go through this entire slide, which includes all the elements that go into the definition of what a medical device is. Suffices to say that we can focus on its intended use, where, as you can see here, it is intended to be used in the diagnosis of disease or other condition, or in the cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of the disease in men or other animals. So we are in good company. And that then it is also another possibility is it is intended to affect the structure or any function of the body, again, of men or other animals. And these are the two positive aspects of the definition, meaning they are defining what the intended use of a medical device or medical technology are, but it's also defined on the negative form or in the negative way by what it is not. And it does not achieve its primary intended purpose through either a chemical action and does not depend on being metabolized. So from the definition, you can start understanding what is the regulatory view of what a medical device is versus what is the common notion of a medical device or a medical technology. And so our story really begins in 1976. 1976, for those of you who are curious, that's the year that a small startup company called Apple was launched. It was also a year when the first civilian supersonic airplane, the Concorde, was launched, and since then it was able to complete its entire flight and become obsolete. Apple is still with us, as you know. However, at that point in time, this is when the regulation of medical devices and medical technology really began. The 1976 amendment of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Law from 1938 is what gave rise to the regulation of medical devices. However, even at that early stage, there were thousands of medical devices that had already been used. And so FDA had to decide how to regulate these devices and how to allow them to remain on the market while new regulations are taking effect. And so there were 19 different panels working for 15 years between 1973 and 1988 that were responsible for classifying about 8,000 different pre-amendment, meaning devices that existed before the enactment of the 1976 Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Amendment, the Medical Device Amendment of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Law. And the FDA decided that the way to regulate medical devices would be to use a classification system. And the classification system will involve a pre-market review, very detailed review of devices that are the highest risk level, that represent the highest risk level to the patient, and those would be classified as class 3, and that any new device would be automatically classified as class 3 unless it can be proven to be substantially equivalent to another device that was classified as class 1 or class 2. And these were the guiding principles for introducing new devices and new technologies to the market. What we can see in this schematic diagram is the different steps associated with different levels of difficulty and challenge uh, uh, of getting FDA clearance or approval for new devices and new technology. First, we have the group that is referred to as unregulated, which does not meet the definition of medical device. As you'll see later on, some devices or some products could be identical to products that are regulated as medical devices. So think about a pulse measurement device that you use in your gym while exercising that measures the pulse rate, and that clearly could be a medical device. But FDA decided that once it is used for a healthy population as part of an exercise, that really represents such a low level of risk that FDA decided to exempt it and therefore does not regulate those devices. Then we have the next level, which is devices that do represent low risk, intended, just as I described, for healthy population or for some patient groups as well, and we'll see that maybe if time allows later on. But because of the low risk that they represent, the FDA exercises enforcement and discretion, which basically means that they do not intend to regulate those as medical devices. The next groups are all medical devices which are fully regulated, but even among those, clearly there are differences among devices that represent low risk, and those are represented here by a Band-Aid and by standard surgical tools. They are all lumped together and classified as class 1, and we'll see what that means in a minute. Then we have, on the other extreme, we have devices whose failure could lead to immediate death or serious injury, and those are devices such as stents, for example, or a pacemaker. Clearly, a failure of these devices would lead to almost immediate death or serious injury. And so in between lies the vast majority of devices, and those are class 2 devices. And those devices represent a moderate risk to the user. And depending on whether such devices already exist on the market or not, they are classified as either a standard class 2 product, which could be cleared to the marketplace by a process called substantial equivalence, which we'll describe in a minute, or if there is nothing similar to it, it is viewed as a new product, which now does have a route to the market through a process called the de novo process. And so let's first address in general class 1 devices. Class 1 devices do not require typically any submission, any regulatory filing with FDA, meaning that FDA doesn't need to see any kind of application for placing such a product on the market. Suffice it to say that those products which are medical devices do require do have to meet certain regulatory requirements, such as registration of the manufacturer and listing of the medical device. A quality system needs to be put in place in order to assure the quality of these products. Labeling requirements, which are the literature that describes the product and how it needs to be used. Medical device reporting in case something terrible happens while using the device, that needs to be reported to FDA. And then there are some additional reporting requirements that are in place. And if they are used as part of an investigational device, then they also need to submit an investigational device exemption if they are to be used in a clinical trial. But typically, once these quality system requirements are met, the device can be put in the marketplace and can be distributed and sold and marketed across state lines. If we go to the other end of the spectrum, class 3 products require a full pre-market approval, meaning that a very detailed and thorough description of all the data that is available to the sponsor, to the manufacturer, in the process of establishing the two elements that are required in order to get a medical device on the market. And those two elements are the safety of the product and its effectiveness. And these two elements need to be supported by a very thorough, long, and expensive set of data that cover basically all aspects of the use of that product. And they typically include laboratory testing, animal testing, and clinical testing. And just to illustrate, as you may know, these days, and it has been the case now for over 10 years, FDA requires payment for their review of the regulatory submission. And that payment for a class 3 product for this year, 2023, that payment is close to $500,000. And so that clearly is a significant significant amount of funds that are paid to FDA for the time the agency spends reviewing these documents. The actual approval process will also require a panel review, a panel of clinical experts that will review the evidence presented by the company and will vote on whether or not to approve that product, and if there are certain conditions that need to be attached to that approval. Just to illustrate that FDA does take into account the fact that there are differences among large established corporations such as Medtronic or Boston Scientific, which will be expected to pay the full amount for the clearance, for the approval of a new class 3 product, versus small entities that can pay the discounted fee. And just for general information, a small business in FDA's view is a business that sells less than $100 million a year. So that is class 3. Those were class 3, and we covered also class 1. Class 3 represent a tiny fraction of the actual submissions, the annual submissions to FDA. That's a tiny fraction because out of the close to 4,000 annual submissions to FDA, about 10% are new class 3 products. Most of the products are class 2 products, moderate devices, moderate risk devices, and those devices are really cleared by FDA. And notice that I used a different term. They are cleared, they are not approved. And they are cleared through the regulatory process by a process that can be referred to as the Me Too. And no social connotations are tagged to the term. That term was invented way before the movement. So what is Me Too? Me Too means in regulatory vernacular, there is already such a product that shares 3 important aspects with the new device that we would like to get on the market. One is its basic technology. Two is its intended use and the indications for use, what it is intended for. And three, its performance. And if you can establish that these three elements are common or substantially equivalent, they don't have to be identical, they just have to be substantially equivalent to a product that FDA had already cleared on the market, then you approach FDA saying basically, I too deserve to be on the market because I am substantially equivalent to such a moderate risk product, and this is the proper classification for it. And that is the reason there are two images here, a straitjacket and a ladder leading to the clouds, is because sometimes establishing such a substantial equivalence is really not trivial, as you'll see in just a minute. And it sometimes the fact that you are introducing a new device and that device needs to be substantially equivalent to an existing device, that appears like almost a straitjacket. You have to fit it very well in order to be granted that 510K clearance. And just to illustrate the difference between the review fees that FDA charges, you remember that for a class 3 product, it was close to $500,000. For 2023, for a 510K submission, which is the regulatory type of the submission that is required for clearing such a product, that is substantially smaller amount. It is on the order of $20,000 for a full-blown submission and about $5,000 for a small business entity. And however, if there is a moderate risk device, which clearly represents not the same risk as faced by the patients using a class 3 product, however, it's a brand new technology, nothing like that existed before. So FDA has now in place and has had for quite a few years a process called the de novo process, where you can establish special controls for for assuring the safety and effectiveness of this product. However, this, as you can see from the fees charged by FDA, which is on the order of $130,000, that is substantially more expensive than a standard, a routine 510K. So, what does the process look like in real life, and what are best practices, and how best practices could affect the outcome of negotiating or interacting with FDA? Well, I think that this long tunnel and then a light, and hoping that the light is not an incoming train, is best illustrative of what I'm going to describe to you next. This is a case study that I was personally involved with, and the story begins in 2002 with the new diagnostic technology that was invented. At that point, the de novo process has already been in effect. However, it was rather rare to have devices cleared by that process. And the challenge was that this was a new non-invasive diagnostic technology without any predicate. And so after 2 years, that product was already in the market in Europe and in some other parts of the world. And a certain body of evidence has already accumulated as to its effectiveness and safety. The company decided to approach FDA, and they basically approached FDA. We were not involved at that point. And they presented the case to FDA, and they said basically there is no predicate, so we assume the product will be a class 3, as we have seen that's indeed the default. And FDA said, fine, I mean, it's your decision. You want to pursue a PMA for that product, go ahead. And as you currently are aware, any product that goes through class 3 requires clinical data, and typically that is done in the context of a pivotal trial. And so FDA approved their protocol for a clinical trial, and off they went, started to acquire clinical data. Well, the process of acquiring clinical data is long, tedious, expensive, and they, at that point, already spent a significant amount of funds running the trial. It has been now 3 years since they first interacted with FDA, and they started having second thoughts about the entire process. The device itself presents very, very low level of risk, clearly does not belong in a class 3. And so how do you get out of a path or regulatory route now that you are already halfway through that? Well, they approached us, and we developed a new strategy. Based on the risk level of the device, we suggested that the appropriate route would be a 510K. Because of some innovative way we viewed some of the other products in that category, we suggested that it could be cleared with no clinical data based on the literature that they have already collected. And they gave us approval to approach FDA with this new approach, new strategy. And so we submitted at that point a pre-IDE, which was the only vehicle that was available for interacting with FDA. We submitted it to FDA, had a meeting with FDA. FDA said it looks interesting. However, the company has already been involved for the past 3 years in pursuing a PMA, and they are already halfway through their study. So we FDA suggest that they proceed with the study and will take your innovative approach under advisement for possible consideration later on. And so the company continued. They completed their clinical trial in 2008. They just missed by 0.1% the lower bound of the 95 confidence interval that they had to meet in order to meet the pre-established primary endpoint for the clinical trial. And so here we are interacting with FDA again, and now FDA is saying, well, the most favorite phrase that FDA uses is, you cannot shoot an arrow and paint the target around it after it hit the target. Therefore, unfortunately, they have to go back to square one, and they have to start the process all anew. And that would have meant a disaster for the company. Even though they had some sales and they were able to float financially, this would have been a complete disaster. And so we started a very, very high stakes interaction with FDA, trying to convince FDA that it really made absolutely no sense and that they should consider the aspects of the healthcare system in the US, the patient's need for that technology, and against the backdrop of overwhelming evidence from the rest of the world that really placing it in a class 3 did not make sense to begin with, makes even less sense now that there is more evidence as to the safety and effectiveness of that product. And so that was probably the most challenging interaction I've ever had with FDA. And that includes the artificial heart, for which I was also responsible for interacting with FDA. And but it took all the way, it took interaction that reached all the way to the FDA's ombudsman to change the rules and to change the regulatory route on which the company embarked. And so here we are, 2012, 8 years after they started the regulatory process, FDA finally agreed with us that indeed a 510K process was appropriate without clinical data. And then in the beginning of 2013, the technology was finally cleared for the market. It has been extremely successful, became really the standard of care for that particular diagnostic test. And the most recent clearance that they achieved with major new indications took only 64 days. So best practices versus less than best practices. Switching gears now, as time has already cut about half of the webinar, I would like to spend some time dealing with digital health. As you can see from this slide, digital healthcare really has manifestations in a variety of new and innovative technologies and applications covering both diagnostic and therapeutic applications. So clearly this vast ocean of new devices and new technologies cannot be covered in such a short webinar. And what I would like to cover is just a few snippets of how FDA views digital devices. And just to illustrate 3 different examples of the innovative use of digital technology, we can see using of a smartphone in a capacity where it is connected to a stethoscope in order to listen to heart sounds, and another application being used in radiology. And that is very interesting because not only is it used to display radiographs, but also the use of AI is very important here, trying to improve the detectability of lesions, for example, in radiographs by using AI and machine learning. And this is a very innovative approach to pattern recognition using AI. And the third element is using it in order to detect cardiac activity, the electrocardiogram, and using a new device tied to a smartphone as an interface for collecting the information, as well acquiring the information, as well as processing it. And just a few examples on the numbers that we are dealing with. Clearly, the use of smartphones now is ubiquitous, and you can see just staggering percentages of the number of adults that are currently using their smartphones for health, as part of their healthcare, and the size, the economic size of digital health based on just mobile applications that is already in the tens of billions of dollars and expected to exceed $100 billion by 2030. So clearly we are talking about a digital revolution, and FDA, as soon as the technology emerged, and that is going back to 2013, and actually 2013 is not the very first time that FDA started paying attention to some aspects of digital health. It actually started in 2005, but by 2013, the FDA already formulated their key approach to the digital devices, and the approach is based using the same principles that are also used for any other medical device, and that basically the risk level is the key element that guides the approval or clearance of this product, depending on the risk that they represent. And the actual regulation depends on whether these are standalone devices or accessories to medical devices that were cleared otherwise. And as you can see, starting or ending actually in April 2023, FDA issued no fewer than 25 different guidance documents covering all aspects of or different aspects of digital health, ranging from general wellness, as I illustrated earlier, with a pulse rate detector, going through medical device data systems that are used in the management of healthcare, mobile medical apps that are used both as software included in medical devices and software as medical devices. Again, even using in mobile medical apps, FDA adopted the approach of quantifying or qualifying the risk that is inherent in the use of a particular app in order to establish its classification. And then with the mushrooming of digital technology and all of its different aspects, that led to the creation of the Digital Health Center of Excellence just 3 years ago at FDA. So what is the digital digital health technology, and how is it viewed by FDA? Basically, the new center that they created, the Center of Excellence for dealing with digital technology, is intended to connect, share, and innovate all at the same time. Because we are all aware of FDA's role as the gatekeeper for new technologies and new devices, a gatekeeper that is trying to assure that the only safe and effective products will enter the US market. But there is another aspect of the FDA charter, and that is fostering innovation, where FDA prides itself on now letting into the market in the US as first in the world some new technologies that are intended to improve the healthcare of the American population. And so the new center is intended to streamline all the different activities at FDA that dealing with digital health. And as you can see from this schematic here, which is taken from FDA's website on digital health, the intent is really to address all the interactions of an individual from the cradle to the hospital bedside at the end of life, all through the process of interacting with patients at different points in their life, as their needs change. And so the different areas that FDA focuses on include telemedicine. They cover data systems, health IT, and wireless technology, clearly focusing on cybersecurity, which is now a must for any medical device, AI and machine learning in software products, software as medical device, and in general, the use of software products, which is a clear deviation and a new dimension for medical devices that used to always contain hardware as a major element of the implementation of the technology. And so just to illustrate the scope of the mobile medical apps that are one aspect of digital health, back in 2013, there were over 13,000 health and fitness apps for consumers. There were over 5,000 apps for medical professionals, and only 103 were actually regulated by FDA. So there is a huge disparity between the overall size of the products and the actual number of them that are specifically and strictly regulated by FDA. And the numbers just keep exploding. And as you can see, in 2020, there were over 300,000 mobile health applications available on the different electronic stores, and clearly only a tiny fraction of that number is regulated by FDA. So what is it that regulated by FDA as far as mobile apps? Well, that is software that can be regulated as software as a medical device, and it doesn't matter whether the platform is a mobile product or whether this is a web-based. FDA views both as based on their intended use and not the actual platform that is used for their processing. And then mobile medical apps will be regulated by FDA if they are, as you can remember from the very first slide, the definition of a medical device, they will be regulated if they are intended for use in the diagnosis of disease or other conditions, intended for use in the cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease, and or intended to affect the structure or function of the body. And these are clear elements that we started the webinar with, and they are clearly the backbone of what classifies a medical device. And so I think I should just try to focus now on the key elements, just to assure you that either unregulated or enforcement discretion products, those are based on the risk level that is presented to the general public and to the intended patient population. And so the vast majority of those apps would not be regulated as medical products. And I want to spend a few minutes, the last portion of this webinar, on a test case, a very interesting test case of a local company, local here in Boston, called Pear Therapeutics, which was the first product that was cleared for prescription digital therapeutics. And that was from the company's website, just to illustrate the innovation involved in that product. It is basically the company views itself as working at the intersection of biology and software technology. So this is clearly a product that it doesn't have any hardware associated with it other than a smartphone and a computer in the clinician's office. But it is intended to deliver better outcomes for patients. And what kind of products did they develop, and did they develop and clear through FDA? Well, 3 products were cleared. One is for the treatment of substance use disorder. The second one is for the treatment of opioid use disorder. And the third one is for the treatment of chronic insomnia. And all of these products were cleared by FDA. So what is the actual product? Well, the actual product is really a set of or a guided or a prescripted behavioral therapy. So it is a series of interactive therapy lessons, sessions with the patient. It is intended to build a self assurance and self ability to deal with the pressures that lead to the consumption of illicit drugs. It is modeled on the community reinforcement approach, which is a fancy term for what is known as the basic approach used by Alcoholics Anonymous, for example, AA. And the intention is to develop an interaction that is shared between the patient and their clinician in order to fight the urge to use either opioids or illicit drugs. And so it is based on a set of structured sessions between the patient and the program. And it is intended for patients who are older than 18 years old, currently enrolled in outpatient treatment under supervision of a clinician. So closing the loop between the patient and the clinician and having the interaction between the patient and the smartphone and the clinician who can see the progress that the patient has, that's the key to the success of that interaction. As far as the patient is concerned, a series of modules are presented to the patient. The patient needs to go through the module, study it, pass an exam or a test at the end of each module in order to advance to the next module. And that has been found to allow them to cope better with the pressures that would otherwise lead to the use of illicit drugs. And so these are just some of the modules that are used as part of the treatment, and it clearly focuses on avoiding the substance, coping with thoughts about the substance use, recognizing negative thinking, and strengthening and fostering positive thinking, making decisions, and so on. This is as far as the patient is concerned. There is a variant of that program called Reset O, which is intended to address patients who suffer from opioid use disorder. And again, it is what you can see here are illustrations of the screens that the patient sees. They need to enter information, and then they can review their progress. And they are rewarded for continuing with the program. I see that we are approaching the end of the hour, so let me just quickly go through the clinician side of the equation. The clinician using telehealth can interact with the patient, sees the patient's progress, and can enter information such as the results of urine drug screening tests that are conducted at the clinic. And I don't want to go into too many details on how the program, how the test was performed and what kind of pivotal trials the company had to go through in order to collect information on the clinical effectiveness of the product. Suffices to say that when comparing the treatment as usual to the treatment plus the program, one can see a significant increase in the percentage of patients who managed to stay away from the use of drugs. And so you are probably asking, here is just the Kaplan-Meier curve showing the proportion remaining on the treatment between the control group, which is in blue, the treatment as usual, versus the treatment using the device. And you can see the increase in the percentage of patients that successfully remained on the plan, leading to a lower use of illicit drugs or opioids. And so they were cleared using the de novo route, and they had quite a few limitations on the use. And the business model involved interaction with insurance companies, with the payers, with the patients themselves. Suffice it to say that even though they had a significant, they managed to contract large organizations. The reimbursement was the weak point in their financial planning. And as you can see, they managed to lose a significant amount of funds, $83 million in 2021, and another $49 million in 2022. So this is what happened to their stock. They were, again, without going into too many details, they raised $250 million. They were traded on the NASDAQ stock exchange. In the initial value was $1.6 billion just before they went through the IPO. And then finally, this is what happened on April 17th, 2023. They filed for bankruptcy. So what are the lessons here? Well, first of all, successfully negotiating FDA requirements is definitely a must. Without that, you cannot be on the market. Using best practices and planning is important if you don't want the process to drag for too long. And also covering the other aspects that are addressed by my good friend and colleague, David Baron, namely the economic aspects, the adoption, the reimbursement are all extremely important if you want to plan for long-term viability of the product. So with that, I thank you for your attention. And if there are any questions, I'll gladly address them.
Thank you so much. It was a terrific, great presentation. We have two questions and we are running out of time. So if you could answer them briefly. One is from Karen Leshem, Ocon Health. If you can discuss the drug and device combination, requirements, classification, how are they being addressed by the FDA? And the second question is about a non-invasive wearable blood glucose sensor classification.
Okay, so starting with the first question, drug-device combinations are regulated based on their primary mode of action. And whether that the primary mode of action is that of the device or the drug will determine what takes the key role and what takes the the secondary role or the supporting role. So if the primary mode of action is based on the technology or on the device, meaning it doesn't have to be metabolized or does not affect chemically the outcome, then if it is mechanical, if it is physical, if it is electrical, then the device would take the lead in the review, and the supporting aspect would be relegated to the drug and vice versa. So that's the first question. The second question, I'm not sure I fully understand. The non-invasive glucose monitoring, what is the classification? I really couldn't tell you off the top of my head. That would require a significant research looking into predicates and looking into the technology.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, so much for
Thank
your
you so much,
participation.
guys. It was fascinating, as always.
Thank you.
And hopefully we'll see you on the next one.